Deep in the mist-shrouded valleys of Appalachia, three sisters, Martha, Clara, and June, lived lives so strange, so unsettling, that even the locals whispered about them in hushed tones. They were young, striking, and disturbingly clever, yet behind their innocent smiles lay secrets darker than the forests they roamed. Strange fires consumed abandoned cabins without explanation. Families reported missing livestock, odd symbols carved into trees, and whispers of deals made with forces no one dared name. Rumors hinted at betrayals, manipulations, and horrors that would make even the bravest shudder. What really happened in the Appalachian Hollows remains hidden, erased from history books, yet traces linger, a shadow of terror in a land already steeped in mystery. Disclaimer: this story is purely fictional. Any resemblance to real people or events is entirely coincidental. Chapter 1. Shadows in the hollow, the Appalachian mist clung to the valleys like a secret too heavy to bear. In a small, weathered cabin on the outskirts of Maple Hollow, Martha, Clara, and June lived under the dim glow of oil lamps, their laughter echoing strangely in the empty night. To outsiders they seemed ordinary, three sisters on the edge of adulthood, clever and spirited, yet there was something in their eyes, a glint of calculation, of curiosity far beyond what one might expect for girls of 21. The day had begun like any other, with the scent of damp earth drifting through the cabin and the distant call of crows announcing the morning. But something was different. Martha, the eldest, had discovered scratches on the floorboards, arranged in a pattern she did not recognize. Clara's gaze lingered on the trees outside, as if she expected them to move. June, humming softly, carried a small, mysterious bundle she refused to show anyone. Locals often whispered about the sisters when they thought no one was listening. Stories of missing livestock, strange fires that appeared in abandoned barns, and odd figures glimpsed through foggy windows at twilight. Most dismissed it as superstition, yet the sisters seemed aware of it all. They moved through the hollow with uncanny precision, leaving no trace of their comings or goings. Their cleverness was unsettling, their curiosity insatiable, and an unease settled over the cabin like a living thing. On that morning, a neighbor, an old man with a crooked back named Mr. Halloway, called out from the path. He claimed he had seen shadows moving along the creek at dawn, figures that did not belong to any person alive. Martha's lips curved into a smile that was neither warm nor friendly. Clara tilted her head, listening to the wind as if it carried a secret meant only for her. June quietly laid her bundle in the corner, third, contents hidden beneath layers of cloth, and whispered words they could barely hear. The sisters knew the hollow held its own rules, and those who dared defy them often vanished without warning. Something in the air promised change, something that would ripple outward, leaving an indelible mark on the valley and its people. The quiet before the storm felt almost sacred, a pause that made the mind shiver with anticipation. That evening, as darkness swallowed the last light, Martha left the cabin with a small lantern, heading toward the creek. Clara followed silently, and June trailed a few steps behind, clutching her bundle as if it were the only thing keeping her tethered to the world. The forest seemed to bend around them, guiding their steps into the unknown. Next, we discover what lurked in the shadows along the creek, an encounter that would set the sisters on a path from which the Appalachian Hollow would never recover. Chapter 2. The Creek's Whisper. The creek was alive with a murmur that only the sisters seemed to understand. Water slithered over stones, carrying secrets from deep within the forest, and the trees leaned inward, their branches forming a natural cage that isolated the sisters from the world beyond. Martha held her lantern high, the dim light flickering across their faces and casting long shadows that danced like specters. Clara's eyes scanned every movement in the undergrowth, while June's grip on her mysterious bundle tightened as though it might slip away if released. It was not unusual for the hollow to hide things. In fact, it thrived on concealment. But that night, the sisters sensed something more, a presence that moved deliberately, patient, observing. A branch snapped behind them, a subtle sound almost lost in the rush of the creek, yet it made their hearts skip. Martha turned sharply, her lips curving into a controlled smile. Clara stepped closer, whispering, "They're watching." June remained silent, her mind elsewhere, calculating. Moments later, a figure emerged from the fog. Tall, hunched and clothed in rags, it did not speak. The sisters froze, yet none flinched. Instead, they studied it, intrigued. There was a strange magnetism in its gaze, a pull that made the air electric. The old tales spoke of creatures or spirits in the hollow, entities that punished the careless. But the sisters did not fear. Instead, a thrill ran through them. Martha crouched near the creek, trailing a finger through the cold water. "It's waiting for something," she said softly. Clara tilted her head, listening to the soft gurgle of the stream, as if it whispered answers only she could interpret. June finally opened her bundle, revealing a small, polished mirror. She raised it toward the figure, and the reflection seemed to ripple unnaturally, twisting its form into shapes that belonged to no human eye. The creature, if it could be called that, paused, its movements deliberate. It tilted its head, studying them as closely as they studied it. For a moment, silence claimed the hollow. Then, without warning, it turned and vanished into the fog, leaving only a faint, metallic scent lingering in the damp air. The sisters exchanged glances, a spark of something unspoken passing between them. Excitement, curiosity, a hunger for the unknown. That night, as they returned to the cabin, the forest behind them seemed to hum with anticipation, as if the land itself had taken notice of their audacity. The sisters understood that this encounter was only the beginning, a prelude to events that would spiral far beyond what anyone in Maple Hollow could imagine. Next, we discover how the sisters' fascination with the unknown begins to corrupt the innocent lives around them, drawing the hollow itself into their growing darkness. Chapter 3. The first victim. The morning fog lingered longer than usual, curling around the hollow like a warning. Martha, Clara, and June returned to their cabin with an unspoken energy pulsing between them. That night by the creek had shifted something, a quiet understanding that their curiosity carried power, and power could be used. They moved with a purpose now, each step deliberate, as though the forest itself whispered instructions no one else could hear. It was Old Man Halloway who first felt the pull. He had always been wary of the sisters, muttering about strange noises, missing animals, and the feeling that the woods were watching. That morning, he ventured too close to the creek, curious about reports of flickering lights in the mist. He found nothing at first, just the gentle flow of water and the smell of damp moss. But as he turned to leave, a soft laughter echoed behind him. Martha stepped from the shadows, her lantern illuminating only part of her face. Her eyes held that strange glint, a mixture of charm and menace that unsettled even the oldest men of the hollow. Clara and June appeared silently behind her, shadows blending with the morning fog. The sisters did not speak. They simply observed, letting Halloway's unease grow until it became unbearable. Then Martha leaned close, whispering words so soft they could have been imagined, yet they pierced the old man's mind like a cold wind. He stumbled backward, his knees giving way on the slick earth. Clara's finger pointed toward the creek, and Halloway followed instinctively, as if drawn by invisible strings. June's mirror caught the pale sunlight, reflecting it directly into his eyes. The effect was hypnotic. In moments, the man was lost to the hollow, wandering deeper into the woods, where even the forest dared not speak. Hours later, when locals came looking for him, there was no trace, no footprints, pets, no cries, only a faint metallic scent lingering in the damp air near the creek. Whispers spread quickly through Maple Hollow. Old Man Halloway had vanished without a struggle, leaving behind only the memory of those three sisters, their smiles, their strange energy, and the unshakable feeling that something inhuman had guided him away. The sisters returned to their cabin, calm and composed, as if nothing had happened. Yet each knew that the hollow had changed. That small act of manipulation marked the beginning of a pattern. Power, they realized, was intoxicating, and the people around them were unwitting players in a game the sisters had only begun to understand. Next, We discover how their growing fascination with control begins to ensnare more than just the curious old men, and the Hollow's darkest secrets start to emerge. Chapter 4. Threads of Influence. The days that followed Old Man Holloway's disappearance passed with a deceptive calm. The Hollow seemed untouched, yet under the surface something had shifted. The sisters moved through their small cabin as if conducting a silent symphony, each glance, each gesture measured with precision. Martha sharpened her knives with a deliberate rhythm, Clara traced patterns in the dirt floor, and June carefully polished her mirror, the glass catching light in strange, hypnotic ways. Word of Holloway's disappearance spread, whispered from porch to porch. Yet the sisters were always present, always smiling, offering small comforts to those who dared ask about the old man. Their innocence was disarming. A neighbor might leave a basket of bread or a warm stew, thinking the sisters needed kindness, but each gift was observed, analyzed, and woven into a growing web of influence. One afternoon, a young boy wandered too close to the creek. Martha caught him first, her sharp eyes narrowing as he approached. She beckoned him with a soft call, almost maternal, yet edged with something darker. Clara followed silently, speaking to him in riddles he could barely understand, planting seeds of obedience with every word. June held her mirror in front of him, reflecting the sun into patterns that made the boy feel dizzy and captivated all at once. By the time the boy ran home, he was unrecognizable, not in appearance but in spirit. Something inside him had changed, an unshakable fascination with the sisters and a quiet fear that made him hesitant to speak of what had occurred. His mother noticed the difference, but when she approached the sisters, they smiled warmly, and all her unease melted into polite conversation. No one suspected the power that had silently taken root. The sisters were learning too. Each interaction revealed the patterns of fear, trust, joy and desire in their neighbors, showing them precisely how to manipulate the Hollow without leaving a trace. The forest seemed to respond, the fog thickening when they wished, shadows stretching to their advantage. It was as if the Hollow itself had taken notice of them, rewarding their cunning. By nightfall, the sisters gathered around the fire. June spoke first, her voice low and deliberate. "We are only beginning," she said, her eyes reflecting the flames. Martha nodded, and Clara smiled faintly, tracing shapes in the smoke. The Hollow held secrets, and now so did they. Next, we discover how their influence spirals into obsession, and a visitor arrives who may finally challenge the sisters' growing control over Maple Hollow. Chapter 5. The Stranger in the Hollow. The Hollow had grown quieter, almost too quiet, the kind of silence that presses against the skin and whispers warnings in the wind. The sisters, however, thrived in it. Each day their control over Maple Hollow tightened, yet they were careful, never reckless, always observant, measuring the effect of every glance, every word. Then one evening, a stranger arrived. He was a traveling surveyor named Elias, tall and lean, with a manner that suggested both caution and curiosity. His boots sank into the damp earth as he approached the sisters' cabin, notebook in hand, intent on mapping the contours of the Hollow. Martha watched from the window, her sharp gaze taking in every detail. Clara lingered in the shadows outside, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. June stayed inside, polishing her mirror, eyes glinting as though she could see past the physical world. Elias greeted them politely, unaware of the undercurrent of tension in the air. "I'm mapping the Hollows for the county records," he said, his voice steady. But the sisters sensed something different in him, a mind alert, analytical, one that might not bend so easily to their influence. That intrigued them more than it threatened them. Martha invited him in for a simple supper, while Clara prepared a small fire to warm the room. June set her mirror on the table, reflecting candlelight across the walls in shifting patterns that Elias seemed not to notice, though the subtle unease in his eyes betrayed the effect. Over dinner, conversation flowed easily. The sisters shared stories of the Hollow's history, carefully shaping details to create intrigue without suspicion. Elias took notes, occasionally pausing to glance at the sisters, studying their movements and expressions. Martha's laughter was soft but calculated. Clara's smiles were gentle yet sharp. June's quiet observation was the most disarming of all. The air seemed charged, as if the hollow itself had tuned in to their meeting. As night fell, Elias offered to set up camp outside, insisting he needed distance to study the land properly. The sisters watched him leave, standing silently by the doorway. Martha's lips curled into a faint smile. "He's clever," she said. Clara nodded. "But clever can be bent." June's reflection in the mirror flickered across the walls, catching the shadows in ways that suggested something unseen was already at work. The hollow had a new element now, a variable the sisters found both challenging and exciting. They understood immediately. This stranger could either become an obstacle or the first real test of their growing power. Next, we discover how Elias begins noticing subtle anomalies in the hollow and why the sisters' carefully constructed web of control might be at risk. Chapter 6. Whispers of Suspicion. The night air hung thick over Maple Hollow, carrying scents of damp earth and decaying leaves, and somewhere in the darkness, the creek murmured secrets only the sisters could decipher. Elias lay in his small tent, but sleep eluded him. There was something in the hollow, something almost imperceptible, that set his instincts on edge. The forest was quiet, too quiet, yet every shadow seemed alive. By morning, Elias noticed the first anomalies. Footprints that vanished mid-trail, reflections in the creek that lingered too long, and the odd metallic scent he could never place. He scribbled notes with a careful hand, but the more he documented, the more he felt the hollow itself watching him, guiding him toward truths he wasn't sure he wanted to know. The sisters, meanwhile, observed from the cabin. Martha poured tea with an effortless calm, though her eyes flicked constantly to the woods. Clara traced patterns in the dust, mapping movements she alone could interpret. June polished her mirror until it gleamed like a shard of ice, occasionally catching Elias's reflection and holding it a fraction longer than necessary. They were patient, testing his curiosity and subtly steering his thoughts like currents in the creek. Elias decided to follow one of the faint trails at dawn, hoping to understand the hollow's unusual patterns. He noticed small signs, scratched trees, broken branches, tufts of hair caught in brambles, that didn't belong to any animal he knew. His pulse quickened as he realized he might not be alone, though no one was visible. Meanwhile, the sisters discussed their plan in whispers, careful not to let Elias hear. "He's different," Martha said, her voice low. "Clever enough to notice? Cautious enough to survive a few tests?" Clara smiled faintly. "Then we must be careful. Too much curiosity can break even the cleverest mind." June held up her mirror, catching a shaft of sunlight that danced across the cabin walls. "And yet, temptation is irresistible." Elias returned to the cabin as the sun climbed, carrying with him a growing unease. Something about the sisters unsettled him, an unspoken power, an awareness that went beyond human. They greeted him warmly, yet every word, every gesture seemed layered, deliberate. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he sensed a pattern, a subtle web of influence wrapping itself around the hollow and him. That night, as Elias lay beneath the stars, the creek whispered again, louder this time. The sisters' influence was extending beyond the cabin, beyond the forest, touching the very air. He realized he had stepped into a place where nothing was quite as it seemed, and the sisters were no ordinary women. Next, we discover how Elias begins to confront the unsettling truth about Martha, Clara, and June, and the first cracks in their control appear. Chapter 7. Cracks in the facade. The hollow was no longer just a place of mist and whispers. It had become a trap, and Elias was beginning to sense it. Each day, subtle anomalies pressed against his reasoning. The echo of footsteps that didn't match the sisters' movements, fleeting reflections in the creek, and the strange sense that the forest itself bent around them. Martha, Clara, and June moved with unnerving grace, each smile carefully measured, each glance layered with intent. Yet Elias, stubborn in his curiosity, began noticing patterns. Small inconsistencies in their stories, odd marks in the dirt, and the mirror that June seemed to use as more than a mere tool of reflection. Elias followed the sisters one morning, keeping a careful distance. They led him through familiar paths, yet twisted them into shapes he had never mapped. Clara paused at a bend, murmuring words he could barely catch. Martha crouched near a gnarled oak, leaving what looked like nothing but a faint metallic trace. June's mirror flashed briefly, catching sunlight, and Elias felt an almost imperceptible pull in his chest, a tingle that unsettled his mind. By noon, he realized the sisters were watching him closely, testing his patience, observing his reactions. And yet, the more he tried to act normal, the more they seemed to guide him. The hollow's air was thick with their influence, subtle but undeniable. He began to record everything meticulously in his notebook, hoping to find a logical pattern, something human to explain what he felt, but every rational explanation slipped through his fingers. That evening, Elias confronted the sisters at their cabin. "I don't understand. Something isn't right," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Martha smiled warmly, a calm yet unsettling expression. "The hollow has its own rules, Elias," she said softly. Clara stepped closer, her eyes narrowing witted with mild curiosity. "Rules you haven't learned yet." June's mirror reflected the candlelight across the walls, illuminating subtle patterns that seemed to move and shift, teasing truths just beyond reach. Elias left the cabin that night with a sinking feeling. He had begun to see the hollow differently, as if it were a living entity, and the sisters were its heartbeat. And somewhere deep in the shadows, he realized that this heartbeat was synchronized with their will, pulsing through the forest, guiding and manipulating everything within reach. Next, we discover how a neighbor's desperate warning reveals the full extent of the sisters' influence, and the hollow begins to fight back against anyone who dares question them. Chapter 8. The Neighbor's Warning. By midweek, Maple Hollow was restless. A strange tension hung in the air, thick as fog, and even the most skeptical locals sensed that something had shifted. Old stories of lost livestock, vanishing men, and strange fires now felt connected, as if a dark thread had been pulled through the hollow for years, and the sisters were at its center. It was Mrs. Dunlop, an elderly widow who had lived at the edge of the forest for decades, who first approached Elias in desperation. Her hands trembled as she clutched a worn shawl. "You don't understand, young man," she whispered urgently. "Those girls, they aren't what they seem. Maple Hollow bends around them. People disappear. Things happen, and they're always there, always watching. Stay away, or you'll vanish too." Elias felt a chill creep along his spine. He had begun suspecting it, but hearing it confirmed from someone outside the sisters' sphere made the danger undeniable. "What do you mean?" he asked cautiously. Mrs. Dunlop's eyes darted toward the forest. "The hollow protects them," she said. "Or maybe it obeys them. I don't know which is worse, but anyone who questions, anyone who resists, gets swallowed by the shadows." That night, Elias returned to the creek to observe the sisters. They appeared as ordinary as ever, smiling, laughing softly, their charm disarming. But the forest had changed around them. Branches arched unnaturally, fog clung low to the ground, and the metallic scent lingered, almost palpable. Martha crouched near the water, studying the ripples. Clara traced symbols in the mud with a stick, patterns that seemed meaningless, yet somehow carried weight. June held her mirror, catching moonlight and reflecting it across the trees in shifting shapes that made Elias's chest tighten with unease. The realization struck him like a hammer. The sisters had learned to bend the hollow itself. Not just the people, not just the fear, but the very environment obeyed them. Every tree, shadow and sound seemed carefully orchestrated, guiding Elias's movements without his knowledge.
and now he understood why the neighbor's warning had been so urgent. As Elias turned to leave, the forest seemed to hold its breath. A low rustle followed him, soft but deliberate. He dared not glance back, but he felt eyes upon him. Martha's, Clara's, June's, blended into the night like spectres. The hollow had revealed a new rule: no one left unchanged. Next we discover how Elias struggles to resist the sisters' influence, and a shocking revelation threatens to expose the deepest secret of the Appalachian Hollow. Chapter 9. The Hollow Fights Back. The following morning the hollow seemed almost alive. Even Elias, cautious and observant, felt its pulse pressing against his chest. Every step toward the sisters' cabin carried a subtle resistance, a sense that the forest itself was testing him. Leaves rustled where no wind blew, and shadows lingered just beyond his vision. Something in the hollow had changed permanently, and the sisters were at its center. Inside the cabin, Martha, Clara, and June went about their morning routine as if nothing had happened. Martha sharpened a set of knives while humming softly. Clara traced intricate designs in the dirt floor, and June polished her mirror, letting it catch the weak sunlight that filtered through the fogged windows. To any observer, the scene appeared ordinary, yet Elias had begun to see the threads connecting their actions to the hollow's subtle shifts: the movement of mist, the timing of bird calls, even the way the creek water glimmered unnaturally. Determined to resist, Elias tried to observe from a distance, but the forest began to obstruct him. Trails he had memorized shifted, familiar landmarks disappeared, and sounds guided him away from the cabin. It was as if the hollow had developed a mind of its own, and it acted decisively to protect the sisters. A subtle tug on his attention, almost hypnotic, made him doubt his senses. The forest was no longer a backdrop. It was an extension of Martha, Clara, and June. That night, Elias confronted the sisters inside the cabin. "I can't ignore it anymore," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "The forest, it obeys you. You're not just manipulating people. You're controlling everything here." Martha smiled faintly, her expression serene, yet unnervingly cold. "Control is merely a matter of perception," she replied softly. Clara traced a finger along a symbol in the dirt floor. "The ache Olo responds to those who understand it," she added. June's mirror reflected a sliver of moonlight across Elias's face, making him shiver. Elias realized the terrifying truth. If the hollow could bend to their will, no one in Maple Hollow was truly safe. And yet, the sisters did not act maliciously out of necessity. They were meticulous, calculating, and thoroughly aware of the fear they inspired. Every glance, every gesture, every reflected light was a small test of power, and the hollow amplified their influence. The forest whispered again, louder this time, a low hum that seemed almost sentient. Elias understood that he had stumbled into a place where the environment itself had become an accomplice, and anyone foolish enough to challenge the sisters would be swallowed by the shadows. Next, we discover how an attempt to document the sisters' power leads to a shocking confrontation, and the hollow itself seems to retaliate against those who pry too closely.
Did you know one of the most unusual true historical cases from the Appalachian region is the story of the Greenbrier Ghost, a murder case from 1897 in Greenbrier County, West Virginia, that remains unique in U.S. legal history. In that year, a young woman named Zona Heaster Shue was found dead, and local authorities initially ruled her death accidental. But her mother, Mary J. Heaster, claimed that Zona's ghost appeared to her multiple times in the weeks after her death, revealing where her body's injuries were and naming her husband as her killer. On this basis, authorities exhumed Zona's body, found clear evidence her neck had been broken, and arrested her husband. He was subsequently convicted of murder, making it the only known case in U.S. history where testimony inspired by a ghost sighting led to a criminal conviction. This strange blend of folklore, grief, and justice shows how deeply story and belief have shaped Appalachian history, long before social media or modern legends.
Chapter 10. The Hollow's Retaliation. Elias awoke with a pounding heart, the echoes of the forest pressing against his mind. He had resolved to document the sisters' power, to capture evidence of what no one else could see. Notebook in hand, he stepped carefully into the morning mist, trying to trace the subtle signs he had observed: footprints, scratches, patterns in the mud. But the hollow itself seemed to resist him. Trails disappeared, shadows shifted unnaturally, and the creek's gentle murmur turned sharp, almost accusatory, as if warning him to turn back. By noon, he had reached the edge of the forest near the creek, where he first saw the sisters' mysterious influence. His eyes caught a glint. June's mirror, left deliberately among the roots of a gnarled oak. The reflection danced unnaturally, showing not the creek, but twisted images of the sisters, overlaying the forest like a hidden map of their control. Elias shivered. The hollow was retaliating, not violently, but intelligently, making it impossible to observe without becoming entangled in its power. The sisters appeared as if summoned by his presence. Martha stepped forward, calm but unnervingly precise. "You are persistent," she said softly. Clara traced symbols in the dirt near the creek, patterns Elias felt in his chest rather than saw. June held her mirror high, reflecting sunlight in a disorienting sequence that made Elias stumble. Every gesture seemed to pull at him, bending his focus and clouding his mind. Elias tried to take notes, but the notebook felt impossibly heavy, and his handwriting became chaotic, disjointed. The forest seemed alive, closing in, guiding him away from the cabin, from the sisters, yet never fully letting him go. It was as if the hollow itself had learned their lessons. Curiosity was dangerous, observation was dangerous, and defiance, even more so. By nightfall, Elias returned to the cabin, shaken but determined. He realized the hollow would not allow outsiders to challenge the sisters. Their power was not merely psychological. It extended into the land itself, into the mist, into every living and non-living element of the forest. Maple Hollow had become an extension of their will, a living, breathing accomplice in their control. As Elias sat by his tent, trying to make sense of it all, he felt a subtle shift in the air. Shadows deepened, and a low whisper seemed to thread through the trees. A warning, a promise, and a threat all at once. The sisters' influence was no longer confined to curiosity. It was survival itself. Next, we discover how the sisters escalate their control over Maple Hollow, and the line between fascination and obsession begins to blur.
Chapter 11. Obsession takes root. Maple Hollow was no longer merely a place. It had become a stage, and the sisters were its quiet but unrelenting directors. Every shadow, every mist-shrouded path, and every creaking branch now served a purpose in their subtle orchestration. Elias watched from a distance, documenting in shaky notes what he dared. But even he could feel the hollow bending around the sisters, reinforcing their power with every passing day. The first sign of true obsession came with the townspeople. Livestock began disappearing again, small animals vanishing from pens, strange symbols etched into fences and doors. Mothers whispered of unsettling dreams. Children spoke of figures watching them at twilight, and even seasoned woodsmen felt an inexplicable chill when walking alone. And always, the sisters were there, present yet untouchable, smiling, offering help, drawing the community deeper into their web. Elias noticed how subtly they worked. Martha's laughter seemed to plant curiosity and fear simultaneously. Clara's calm demeanor invited trust while masking sharp scrutiny. June's mirror reflected more than light. It reflected the hollow's secrets in ways that unsettled even the most rational observer. The townspeople, unaware, were becoming extensions of the sisters' will. One evening, a neighbor approached the cabin, trembling. "I can't sleep. It's them," she whispered. "They're everywhere." Martha leaned closer, voice soft and soothing. Clara placed a hand lightly on the woman's arm. June's mirror caught the moonlight and reflected it across the walls in shifting shapes that made the neighbors sway as if caught in a trance. Within moments, she left calmer, convinced her fear had been imagined, but the sisters had planted the memory of dread, a seed that would grow over time. Elias realized the danger was no longer subtle. The sisters' influence had become contagious, infecting the hollow itself. It was a power built on obsession, fascination, and fear, an invisible web that ensnared every living thing, including him. The deeper he studied them, the more he understood that Maple Hollow was no longer a place of nature alone. It was a living testament to Martha, Clara, and June, and every shadow echoed their intent. As night fell, Elias lit a small lantern by the creek, determined to resist, to observe, to survive. But the forest seemed to pulse in response, almost mocking him. The sisters' control was no longer just psychological. It had become part of the land, part of the hollow, part of him. Next, we discover how the sisters' power escalates to a chilling new level, and Elias faces a choice that may define his fate in the hollow forever. Chapter 12. The Hollow's Darkest Hour. The mist rolled in heavier than ever, swallowing Maple Hollow in a suffocating gray. The sisters moved through it like shadows of their own making, every step measured, deliberate, and entirely their own. The forest bent around them, echoing their presence in ways that unsettled even Elias, who had begun to steel himself against their influence. But the hollow was no longer merely a place. It had become an extension of the sisters' will, a living organism reacting to their slightest whim. That night, a series of fires broke out in abandoned barns across the hollow. Smoke curled unnaturally, refusing to disperse with the wind, and whispers, almost inaudible, yet haunting, threaded through the forest. Locals awoke in panic, only to find the fires extinguished by morning, leaving no sign of human involvement. And yet, everyone felt it. A presence, unseen but profoundly felt. The sisters' laughter drifted faintly through the trees, a melody that chilled the spine even as it captivated the mind. Elias moved cautiously, notebook in hand, trying to piece together the events. He realized the hollow itself was enforcing the sisters' power. Every fire, every misplaced shadow, every fleeting sound was a message. This was their domain, and trespassers were warned. But he could not turn away. Fascination mingled with fear, and he felt himself drawn deeper, compelled to observe, to understand, to survive. Inside the cabin, Martha sharpened her knives with precise rhythmic strokes. Clara traced new patterns in the dirt floor, symbols designed to manipulate both mind and perception. June polished her mirror until it gleamed unnaturally, reflecting glimpses of the fires, the hollow, and Elias himself. Each sister operated in harmony with the others, a trio so in sync that it was impossible to discern where one ended and the other began as the fells. Night deepened. Elias confronted them once more. "You've gone too far," he whispered, his voice almost lost in the shifting mist. Martha's smile was calm, almost maternal. "Far? Or just further than you can see?" Clara's eyes gleamed with cold amusement. June's mirror caught the moonlight, reflecting fragments of the forest in ways that made Elias's mind reel. The hollow responded, rustling, pulsing, as if confirming the sisters' words. Elias realized the horrifying truth. Their power was absolute here. Maple Hollow had become a mirror of their intent, and the forest itself would defend them, manipulate intruders, and preserve their secrets at any cost. The sisters were no longer simply manipulating people. They had fused with the land, becoming inseparable from its very essence. Next, We discover the sisters' ultimate plan for the Hollow and how Elias faces a terrifying choice: resist and risk everything, or surrender to the power that now commands the land. Chapter 13. The sisters' final game. The Hollow had grown restless, almost alive in anticipation. Every rustle of leaves, every shift of fog, carried purpose. Martha, Clara, and June moved through the forest with a confidence that bordered on supernatural. Their influence was no longer subtle, it was undeniable. Animals, weather, and even the trees seemed to bend to their will. Maple Hollow itself had become a living instrument of their power, an extension of their intent, and the boundaries between land and sister had blurred completely. Elias, exhausted but determined, tried to follow. His notebook overflowed with observations, sketches, and frantic notes, yet each step he took felt heavier, as though the Hollow resisted his intrusion. He saw symbols etched into the bark, patterns in the mist, and fleeting reflections in the water, all echoing the sisters' influence. He realized they were orchestrating more than fear now. They were shaping reality itself within this valley. Inside their cabin, Martha surveyed the room with quiet satisfaction. Clara traced an intricate web in the dirt, lines connecting points only they could understand. June held her mirror high, catching sunlight and splitting it into sharp beams that danced across the walls, highlighting the intricate plan the sisters had been constructing all along. It was no longer a game. It was a symphony, and they were its unseen conductors. Elias approached cautiously, trying to assert his presence, to understand, to intervene. But the Hollow reacted. Shadows moved unnaturally, fog thickened, and distant whispers became almost intelligible. Leave. Resist. Submit. The sisters smiled faintly, as if amused by his struggle. "You've seen enough to understand," Martha said softly. Clara's eyes glimmered with cold precision. "But do you understand the cost?" June's mirror reflected the flickering firelight, splitting reality into shards that threatened to unmoor Elias's perception. He realized he had reached the heart of their design. The Hollow, the sisters, the land, they were inseparable, a singular force of manipulation and control. Any resistance would be dangerous, but surrender meant losing himself entirely to the sisters' influence. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet something in him lingered, compelled to observe, fascinated by the audacity of their power. As the night closed in, the sisters extended a silent challenge. The Hollow pulsed in response, alive, aware, protective. Elias had a choice: resist and risk being consumed by the living forest, or surrender to the sisters' will and become a part of the dark, hypnotic rhythm that now defined Maple Hollow. The valley waited, holding its breath, as the sisters' plan reached its chilling culmination. Next, we discover the shocking resolution of the sisters' story and what becomes of Elias in the Hollow, and the secret Maple Hollow now guards forever. Chapter 14. The Hollow's Secret. Maple Hollow had never been silent, but that night, even the wind seemed to pause. The mist rolled in thick waves, swallowing the forest in a gray, trembling embrace. Martha, Clara, and June moved with deliberate calm, their eyes reflecting a depth of power no human could ever claim. The Hollow itself responded to them, trees bending, shadows lengthening, and the creek whispering their secrets back to them. Elias stood at the edge of the clearing, notebook clutched in trembling hands. He had followed every clue, documented every anomaly, yet the truth now pressed against him in a suffocating weight. The sisters were inseparable from the Hollow. They had fused with the forest's rhythm, bending both nature and human perception to their will. His knowledge made him an outsider, yet curiosity, his stubborn need to understand, kept him rooted to the spot. Martha stepped forward first, calm but commanding. "You sought the truth," she said softly. "But some truths should not be touched." Clara's gaze was steady, assessing, a predator measuring its prey. June raised her mirror, reflecting moonlight into shifting patterns across Elias's chest. The forest pulsed, almost consciously, reinforcing the sister's control, urging him to submit. Elias felt the pull, an irresistible tug at both mind and body. He tried to resist, forcing himself to step back, but the hollow conspired against him. Every shadow seemed to reach for him, every rustle of leaves whispered a warning. Every reflection in the creek mirrored his growing helplessness. And yet, fascination lingered. He could not look away. The sisters smiled faintly, almost kindly, as though acknowledging his struggle. The hollow exhaled with a sound like a sigh, folding Elias into its rhythm. In that moment, he understood. The sisters had become something beyond human, their story written not in pages or memories, but in the land itself. Maple Hollow now guarded their secret, a living testament to their audacity, their intelligence, and their darkness. Elias's notebook fell to the damp earth, pages fluttering in the mist. Whether he remained human or became part of the Hollow's eternal rhythm, no one would ever know. The sisters returned to their cabin, laughter soft but knowing, and the Hollow settled once more, watchful, protective, and impenetrable. Maple Hollow would remember, and anyone who dared to seek its secrets would be swallowed in shadows, just as it had always intended. The Appalachian sisters, Martha, Clara, and June, remained too clever, too cunning, and far too dangerous for history books. Their legacy was not in stories told, but in a forest that whispered their name forever.